I'm Carrie Ann Stout, founder and CEO of Vinco Bar Exam Coaching. And today we're going to talk about the best practices for taking a course online. So you may not already know this, but Vinco is a totally online virtual bar exam coaching company. But in addition to that, I personally have had 5 or 6 years at this point of teaching online classes. So at a time where a lot of people are taking online classes for the first time or having their semester disrupted and moving online, I thought it might be helpful to share some tips and tricks on how to get the most out of taking a class online, kind of what you can expect, and how you can be successful taking an online class. So let's jump right in. The first thing you want to consider when taking an online class is the format of the class. So you want to find out whether the class is synchronous or asynchronous. And I know those sound like big words, and it took me longer than it probably should have to figure out what they mean and what the difference is, but it's actually pretty simple. A synchronous online class is what you might call a live online class, meaning your professor is there in real time, usually via video, giving a lecture, much like you would get if you go to class. Whereas an asynchronous class isn't taking place at the same time. So those classes are going to be more made up of discussion forums or discussion boards or threads. It means that in order to complete the class and the work in the class, you don't need to necessarily be physically present at a certain time, right? So synchronous is going to have a date and a time where you have to show up and be present and interact. An asynchronous class is going to be made up of materials and deadlines and assignments, but actual in real time communication likely will not be necessary. The second thing you want to consider about your online class is the platform that it's being delivered on. So, is it going to be on Zoom or Skype or Teachable or Twen or Blackboard or BlueJeans? Like, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different online learning platforms. Your school, Moodle is a big one. That's one that I have a lot of experience teaching on. um, your school may have something else that I didn't mention here, but you want to know as soon as possible where you're going to have to go log in and complete the requirements of this class so that you can start familiarizing yourself with the tech of it, right? Some of these things are more user-friendly than others. A lot of the things that I just named are very user-friendly, and have really great features, but you don't want to be trying to fumble around and figuring out how it all works 5 minutes before class starts. So once you know what kind of tech is being used, you kind of want to look into that, research the instructions, and figure that out so that that's one less thing you have to worry about in addition to, the actual learning that you have to do in class. The third thing that you want to consider is any and all instructions from your professor. Now, this is pretty good advice even if you're taking an in-person residential class, right? You are taking that particular professor, their instructions are important. But it can be even more important in an online class because checking the boxes, following the instructions, following deadlines, following protocols, they're really important to making the online classroom run smoothly, right? It's not like the professor can just like stand at the front of the room and tell everyone to be quiet and everyone can listen. If somebody's having tech issues, if somebody didn't follow the instructions, if there's a certain way you're supposed to ask questions and you're not following that, like those things can be very disruptive to the class, even if unintentionally. So you want to look out for your professor's rules in like a synchronous class, for example, about how to ask questions, whether your video should be off or on, whether your microphone should be off or on, what the attendance policies are for the class. So how do you get counted as having attended the class, right? Maybe there's an affirmative step that you have to take to be noticed and counted, since there isn't going to probably be like an attendance sheet. Will they be having virtual office hours of some kind, right? Just basically, how is this class being online changing those protocols in the way that you're interacting with your professor and the way that you're interacting with your classmates, and basically, what are the rules of the classroom? Next, you basically want to act like you're taking an in-person residential class in terms of how you keep up with your studying, your outlining, your preparation for class, your preparation for finals. It's really no different than taking an in-person class, right? A lot of there is a sort of like misconception that online classes are easier. And I can tell you from, I teach a lot of online classes. I've taught them at the undergrad level, master's level, law school level. I've taken them at the undergrad level and law school level with all different kinds of tech, with all different kinds of professors. And it's not any easier, right? You're not in for an easy or less work. It's just a different delivery format. And you can likely wear your pajamas, which is great. But don't get in this mindset that I'm not going to have to do as much. You basically want to behave as if this class is as hard, if not harder, because you're trying to get accustomed to a new learning format than your traditional in-person residential classes, right? And in addition, you might have to be a little bit more proactive about reaching out, right? Because you can't just go knock on the door for office hours necessarily. If you're feeling lost and confused, you're not going to just like run into your professor after class and be able to get your questions answered. You're going to have to reach out with an email, or if they have virtual office hours or something, take advantage of that. But get out of your head that this is going to be super easy now just because it's online. You're still going to have to do those outlines, do those case readings, and show up prepared to be called on and prepared to interact with your classmates the same way that you would if you were in person. Now that we've gone through some, general tips and tricks for online learning, I want to talk a little more specifically about some tips and tricks for asynchronous learning and synchronous learning. So if you are in a synchronous class, meaning your professor is having you show up at 10 a.m. on Monday and attend a class where they will be live streaming, audio, video, whatever, but you guys need to be there at the same time as your professor, right? There's an actual class time. Here are some things you want to consider. First, you need reliable internet, okay? Make sure that you are logged in. I wouldn't try to do it from your phone, from your data plan, unless you have to. I wouldn't try to do it from your phone at all. If you have a computer or a tablet, you're going to just have a much better experience interacting. It's going to feel more like a classroom setting. So reliable internet, use your laptop, make sure you're in a quiet place, right? If you're home, if you're at a coffee shop, whatever the case may be, but you need to be able to focus. You might be called on. A lot of background noise would be distracting, distracting. So you want to make sure that you're in a quiet place. I recommend that you log on early, at least for your first class, because you don't know what the tech might do, right? Even if something's user friendly, if it's your first time using it, you might mess it up or it might not work exactly as planned. So in order to have your class start on time and not hold your classmates up, make sure you log in a few minutes early for that first class. You also want to make sure that you follow your professor's rules about video and audio, right? So if they tell you videos on, microphone off, make sure that you're following those parameters so that you're not distracting everyone with background noise. If the professor doesn't give you any specific rules, I would say the default best practice is video on, audio off, right? Video on, your professor wants to see you. They don't want to talk to a blank screen. If it's a synchronous class, it's meant to be interactive. It's meant for you to see them and them to see you. But audio off, unless you're being called on or unless you have a question, so that you're not distracting everyone with background noise. Also participate, right? As a teacher, I know what it's like to stand in front of a classroom and ask a question and have 100 blank stares looking back at me. And I know what it's like to stand there uncomfortably waiting for someone to talk. But usually I can turn the discomfort around and make it so awkward that somebody finally raises their hand in class. It's a little harder in an online class to pull that though, right? So if there's supposed to be a dialogue, if your professor is asking questions, if they are expecting participation, and you need to do that, right? You need to, whether it's through the chat, whether it's through unmuting yourself, whatever the rules of your class are, it's really important to participate in a synchronous class because that's a big part of the reason why the professor probably made it synchronous, so that you can still have that feel of a residential class, but online instead. And then finally, close down your browsers that are not being used for the class, shut the door, put the phone away, limit the distractions, right? It's if you use a computer in your residential classes, you know how easy it is to get sucked in and distracted by whatever is going on online, social media, the news, and now more than ever, the news is probably pretty distracting. So I encourage you to close down everything that you're not using for the class, put the phone away, close the door, and just be there for the hour, 2 hour, 3 hours, whatever it is that you're in that class, and give it your full attention. So for asynchronous learning, there's a little more flexibility. There's a little, there are fewer rules in this case because there's not as many communication protocols because you're not there in person. Again, you want to make sure you have reliable internet. It's not great to be missing deadlines because, you can't upload it at the last minute, right? Not that you should be uploading your assignments or submitting your assignments at the very last minute anyway, but you don't want to run into those problems. So make sure that you have a good internet connection. Posting deadlines are super important for asynchronous learning, right? Deadlines in general are important in a law school class. I recognize that. But with asynchronous learning, things move fast. It's from one assignment onto the next assignment. If you are utilizing discussion boards or discussion forums or threads where you're interacting, that's really the class discussion. And so if you have a week 1 class discussion that you're not responding to until week 2, you're not really attending class, right? You're not really being part of the interaction of part of that community. So you really want to make sure that you are going on those discussion boards when you're supposed to, that you're interacting when you're supposed to, and that you're really adhering to those deadlines. Finally, you want to make sure that you strictly follow any writing guidelines. So I understand in the age of the internet, and listen, I grew up with the internet as well, it's a more casual way of writing online. And I have a more casual writing style to begin with. But if you're interacting on discussion forums, if you're writing assignments and submitting them for class, you want to make sure that you are following the writing expectations that your professor sets out. So that might be blue book citations for everything you do across the board. That might mean a slightly less formal standard for discussion forums and a higher standard for turned in graded assignments. Your professor will dictate that, but overall you want to avoid the shorthand. You want to avoid being too casual. You want to make sure that the writing that you're submitting is substantive and not just saying like great job or good job to a classmate or something. You want to make sure that you are meaningfully engaging and that you're using a language and tone that is appropriate for the class. So as someone who has been teaching and learning online for years, I think online learning is great. I love working from home. I love teaching virtual classes and working virtually with students. I think it spreads opportunity, and it is a way that, particularly in these times where residential and in-person classes are not really possible in a lot of places, it allows us access to information and our ability to continue on with our educations and our studies. So I know it can be scary to be doing something new, and it might not be what you're used to, but I hope that some of these tips, tricks, considerations can help you feel more comfortable as you engage with online learning. And if you have any questions at all, you can leave a comment. You can find us at info@vancoprep.com. We're more than happy to answer any questions that you may have about learning online. So I hope you can apply these tips. I hope you can share them with someone who may need to hear them, and I will see you in the next video.